I don't know where his ashes rest. No one knows. Thousands of horsemen trampled that land beyond recognition, and those who might have known, those who participated in the Great Khan's final journey, were mercilessly slain so that this secret would remain forever. The secret of the death and burial of a man whose name made the whole world tremble. A man who seemed to have emerged from the boundless, ruthless steppe itself. I saw that place with my own eyes. A cold wind pierced to the bone, and the horizon vanished in a hazy mist. Here, in this harsh wasteland, more than just people were born. Here steel was forged, a will that would reshape nations, steel destined to forever change the map of all the world I knew. And it was here, amidst the eternal struggle for survival, that I first heard the name, Genghis Khan, Chapter 1, Cradle of the Storm, Ancient Mongolia. Before we delve into the astonishing saga of Genghis Khan himself, his life, and his dizzying conquests, it's vitally important for me to feel the pulse of the place where it all began. I'm speaking of ancient Mongolia. Today, when we utter the word Mongolia, my mind's eye involuntarily conjures vast expanses of steppes, hills, and semi-deserts, endless blue skies, piercing winds, and of course the silhouettes of nomadic yurts. In ancient times, these lands looked strikingly similar. However, life back then was even harsher and demanded immense resilience and endurance from anyone who wished to survive and even slightly prosper. Imagine a territory stretching over 1,000 kilometers, from the majestic Altai mountain ranges in the west to the boundless steppes of Manchuria in the east. To the north, impenetrable coniferous forests of Siberia encroach upon these lands, while to the south lies the harsh and arid Gobi Desert, which served as a formidable natural barrier for any outsider. The climate in these regions was always brutal. Long, incredibly cold winters when temperatures dropped significantly below freezing were followed by short yet equally scorching summers with blazing sun. Spring and autumn passed swiftly, bringing sharp weather changes and powerful piercing winds. For the inhabitants of these lands, the weather was not merely a whim of nature. Their survival depended directly on it. Under such extreme conditions, an agricultural society simply could not form. This is why the Mongols, like their ancestors many centuries before them, chose the only possible path, a nomadic way of life. Nomadism was not a coincidence or a whim. It was the sole means of survival and of making the most efficient use of the steppe's meager resources. Mongolian tribes constantly moved in pursuit of pastures, which were vital for their numerous herds of sheep, goats, horses, camels, and cattle. These animals provided the Mongols with literally everything: meat and milk for sustenance, wool and hides for making clothes, footwear, yurts, and all household items. Life on the steppe was not just difficult, it was mortally dangerous, and so from an early age, Mongols were compelled to become excellent horsemen, skillful hunters, and most importantly, fearless warriors. They had no permanent cities or grand fortresses, but they possessed incredible mobility, impeccable discipline, and unwavering cohesion, qualities that allowed them to successfully survive and overcome any, even the most unimaginable hardships. They lived in yurts, lightweight, durable, quickly dismantled dwellings, perfectly suited for constant movement. It was in such conditions that a unique Mongolian culture was forged, whose main values were freedom, unwavering tribal unity, and the deepest respect for ancestors. Ancestors held colossal sacred significance for the Mongols. They sincerely believed that the spirits of departed generations were constantly present, guiding and assisting their living descendants. Reverence for the deceased became a crucial part of Mongolian tribal culture, and each person's lineage held immense, sometimes decisive importance. The nobler the ancestors, the higher the status and respect accorded to an individual in society. Genghis Khan himself, named Temujin at birth, was a representative of the noble Mongolian Borjigin clan, tracing its lineage back to the legendary ancestor, Borte Chino, which literally means gray wolf. According to ancient legends, Genghis Khan's ancestors were not merely humans, but mighty and proud beings, endowed with special strength and wisdom. These legends were passed down through generations and became an integral part of Mongolian self-identity, emphasizing their uniqueness and chosen status. From childhood, Temujin grew up absorbing stories of his glorious ancestors and their incredible exploits, which inspired him and shaped his personality. He matured in a harsh environment where strength, cunning, and unquestioning loyalty to the tribe were keys to survival and success. Even then, I sensed something more than just a will to survive awakening within him. He realized that his life was to be a continuation of his ancestors' glorious line, and that he was destined to unite the fragmented Mongolian tribes into a single formidable nation. Thus, the roots of the great Mongol Empire run deep into these harsh, boundless steppes, where a unique nomadic way of life, a culture of strength, unity, and sacred reverence for ancestors were forged. All of this prepared the ground for the birth of a great man who was destined to change history forever. A man named Temujin, and later, Genghis Khan. It is to him and his astonishing epic destiny that I now turn. Chapter 2. The Birth of a Leader. Temujin's Trials. Temujin was born around 1162 in a nomadic encampment, nestled comfortably on the banks of the Onon River in the heart of ancient Mongolia. He came into the world as the son of Yasuge Bagatar, the valiant head of the Kiad-Borjigin clan, one of many Mongolian clans proudly tracing their lineage from the legendary Grey Wolf, Borte Chino. The name Temujin, given to the child at birth, meant blacksmith or one who forges iron, and this name was not chosen by chance. Temujin's father Yasuge had achieved an important victory in battle over a noble warrior named Temujin Yuge shortly before his son's birth, and thus decided to immortalize his triumph. Yasuge himself was an influential man among the Mongols, renowned for his military successes and authority. But his position was not absolute. I saw how Mongolian tribes were constantly in conflict with one another, and stability in these lands was merely a fragile illusion. Temujin's childhood was spent amidst these endless confrontations, yet for the first few years he lived relatively comfortably, surrounded by a loving family and under the strong protection of his mighty father. However, his world collapsed when the boy was only 9 years old. His father Yasuge, during one of his journeys, stopped at a Tatar encampment, with whom, to put it mildly, he had very strained relations. But at that moment, a temporary truce was in effect between them. Despite this, the Tatars committed an act of monstrous perfidy. They treacherously poisoned Yasuge. Weakened, tormented by the poison, he still managed to return home but soon died, leaving his family on the brink of utter destitution. The death of a clan leader in the Mongolian steppes meant the inevitable ruin of the family. Support and protection depended solely on the authority and strength of the male chieftain. After Yasuge's death, his kinsman, without the slightest hesitation, immediately turned away from his widow Hoelun and her children, deeming them weak and utterly incapable of independent existence. Temujin's family was simply abandoned to their fate in the harsh Mongolian steppe, without animals, almost without means of subsistence. Now, Hoelun and her children were forced to fight for survival alone, enduring constant hunger, piercing cold, and the relentless threat of attacks from other tribes. I imagined how, alongside his mother, young Temujin learned hunting, fishing, gathering, and all other essential survival skills. In these harsh, brutal conditions, his character was quickly hardened. An unyielding will, incredible patience, and a unique ability to make the toughest, sometimes cruel decisions were forged. One of the most striking and, by the standards of the time, uncompromising episodes of Temujin's early life was the conflict with his half-brother, Bektar. The conflict arose over a trivial hunting catch, but in reality it expressed a much deeper rivalry for leadership within their small, abandoned family. Temujin, who was only about 13 years old at the time, coldly killed Bektar with an arrow from his bow. This act, without a doubt, shocked everyone around him, and showed that he was ready to make harsh decisions and fight for his place in this merciless world. This episode became a turning point. Temujin became the unspoken but undeniable head of the family. Soon after, young Temujin endured yet another, perhaps the most difficult trial. He was captured by the hostile Taichud tribe, who feared his rapid maturation and potential vengeance for past grievances. The young man was shackled in heavy wooden stocks, a kong, which restricted his movement and caused constant pain and humiliation. The Taichud planned to kill him, but thanks to incredible cunning, daring bravery, and unexpected help from some secret supporters, Temujin managed to escape. During his escape he managed to hide in dense thickets and for a long time concealed himself in the icy river water until his pursuers gave up their search. This audacious escape only strengthened the legend of his courage and unyielding resolve among the Mongols. Upon returning to his family, Temujin systematically, step by step, began to gather like-minded individuals around him. People who, like him, had been outcast or deprived of tribal support began to see in him not just a leader, but one capable of uniting them and altering their harsh destiny. He began to form his first retinues, which were distinguished by unprecedented loyalty and iron discipline. Among his initial supporters were loyal friends and future great generals, Boorchu and Jeeb, who endured all unimaginable trials with him and became indispensable figures in his subsequent conquests. One of the key figures in Temujin's youth was Jamuka, his blood brother, and at the time his best friend. Their friendship seemed absolutely unbreakable. They exchanged vows of brotherhood, mixing their blood and swearing eternal loyalty. However, gradually, imperceptibly, a rivalry emerged between them. A struggle for power and leadership over the fragmented tribes. Their paths would later diverge, transforming them from best friends into mortal enemies. But it was this complex, at times agonizing friendship that played a crucial role in shaping Temujin as a leader who could learn from any situation, even the most bitter. Gradually, thanks to his unyielding charisma, perseverance, impressive military successes, and astonishing political wisdom, Temujin began to unite more and more supporters around him. Mongolian tribes, previously fragmented and constantly warring among themselves, saw in him a man capable of bringing peace and order, ending the bloody internecine conflicts and forging a unified, mighty state. Chapter 3. The Ascent to Power, Temujin's Wars and Triumphs. Once Temujin had gained authority and gathered his first most loyal followers, his path to absolute power was still far from complete. Now an equally difficult task lay before him: to convince the numerous and warring Mongolian tribes that unification under his command would be the sole path to prosperity and greatness. Among Temujin's first adversaries were the Merkit tribe, dangerous and formidable neighbors who had a long-standing, painful conflict with his family. It was the Merkits who, in his youth, abducted his wife Borte, causing one of the first serious wars of his life. With the help of his loyal ally and blood brother Jamuka, as well as a future powerful ally, Ong Khan, also known as Togrul Khan of the Kare tribe, Temujin organized a successful campaign. He routed the Merkits and rescued his wife. This victory not only solidified his authority among his warriors, it demonstrated to all the steppe tribes that this young leader was capable not merely of surviving, but also of mercilessly avenging himself against his enemies. Temujin did not seek to win solely through brute force of arms. On the contrary, he skillfully employed subtle diplomacy, forging crucial political and familial alliances. One such key alliance was his rapprochement with the powerful Kare Khan Togrul. This man was one of the most authoritative rulers in the Mongolian steppes. He had previously supported Temujin's father, and thus Temujin referred to him as his foster father. This alliance significantly elevated his status among other nomadic chieftains and provided him with much-needed political support during the initial, most challenging years of his struggle for power. However, political alliances on the steppe were fragile and often shifted. Soon, Temujin had to face betrayal from Ong Khan himself. The reason for the break was Temujin's growing power and authority, which began to cause alarm and bitter jealousy in the old Khan. As a result, their relationship escalated into open conflict, rapidly transitioning into a full-scale war. Despite the numerical superiority of Ong Khan and his many allies, Temujin displayed outstanding strategic abilities. He routed the Karats and forced Ong Khan to flee, which soon led to his ignominious demise. One of the most challenging episodes on his path to power was the struggle against his longtime friend and blood brother, Jamuka. Their alliance, founded on strong friendship and mutual support, transformed into a brutal, uncompromising competition for leadership. Jamuka, a charismatic and talented commander, saw himself as equal to or even superior to Temujin, and simply could not accept the role of a second man. Soon, a protracted, bloody war began between them, culminating in the Battle of the 13 Kharin in 1187. Jamuka achieved a temporary Pyrrhic victory, but he made a fatal mistake. He brutally dealt with Temujin's captive warriors, which caused deep revulsion even among his own followers. Many of them began to defect to Temujin's side. Drawn by his fairer treatment of warriors and captives, Temujin masterfully exploited these situations, demonstrating to chieftains and common warriors alike that he could lead people not only through strength but also through wisdom and, most importantly, honor. It was precisely his approach to warriors and respect for his opponents that often tipped the scales in his favor. Another significant episode was the war with the Naimans, one of the most powerful steppe peoples. It was in the battle against them in 1204 that Temujin definitively cemented his reputation not merely as a strong warrior, but also as a talented, far-sighted leader. The victory over the Naimans showed the remaining tribes that resistance to him was futile, and most steppe chieftains chose to voluntarily join him. Thus, by 1206, thanks to a series of dazzling victories and subtle diplomatic successes, the Mongolian tribes were almost entirely united under Temujin's rule. The moment had arrived to formally solidify his status as the sole supreme ruler. For this purpose, a great Kurultai, a grand assembly of all noble Mongolian clans and tribes, was convened at a place called Dalun Boldog, near the headwaters of the Onan River. All the major leaders of the Mongolian tribes, recognizing Temujin as the most worthy among them, arrived at this Kurultai. It was here, before the entire Mongolian nation, that Temujin was given a new name, Genghis Khan, which literally means universal ruler or oceanic ruler, emphasizing his greatness and absolute power. This event became pivotal and truly historic, as for the first time in centuries of internecine strife, the Mongolian tribes recognized themselves as a single nation under one leader. But the Kurultai of 1206 signified more than just the unification of the Mongols. It symbolically marked the dawn of an entirely new era, an era of great conquests that would forever alter the political and cultural landscape of a vast portion of Eurasia. Genghis Khan was proclaimed not merely a ruler, he became a symbol of unity, unyielding strength, and future greatness. Chapter 4. The Empire's Foundation, the Yasa and the Military Machine. Once the Mongolian tribes were united under Genghis Khan's leadership, one of the most crucial tasks before him was the creation of a solid, well-organized state. Previously, the Mongols lived fragmented according to their own customs and rules, but now they were to become part of a unified grand whole. To achieve this monumental goal, Genghis Khan developed a unique system of laws, governance, and army organization that became the unshakable foundation of his empire. The central element of this system was the renowned Mongolian Code of Laws, known as the Yasa. The word Yasa can be translated as decree or law. It was a unique, comprehensive set of rules and norms of conduct, governing virtually all aspects of Mongolian society. The Yasa was not recorded in a single cumbersome document. Its provisions were codified as short, extremely clear, and strict directives which were specifically memorized. The Yasa was based on simple and understandable principles: absolute loyalty to the Khan, deep reverence for elders, unquestioning respect for warrior brotherhood, and strict adherence to discipline. Laws regarding mutual assistance and support held a special place, without which survival in the harsh steppe conditions would have been simply impossible. The Yasa mercilessly prohibited theft, lying, betrayal, and other grave offenses, punishing them severely. For instance, treason, desertion, or betrayal of the Khan carried the penalty of inevitable death. The significance of the Yasa for the Mongols was colossal. It became not merely a code of laws, but a symbol of order, stability, and justice. Thanks to it, people knew what the Khan expected of them, and also perfectly understood their rights and duties in this new grand society. The Yasa enabled Genghis Khan to forge a cohesive and disciplined people, ready to follow him on any feats and conquests. No less important to the Mongol Empire's astounding success was its army, one of the most powerful and organized military forces of its time. Genghis Khan's army was distinguished by extraordinary discipline, clear hierarchy, and absolute fanatical loyalty to its ruler. The army's foundation consisted of tens, hundreds, and thousands, each with its own commander. Thus, the smallest combat unit was a 10-man squad, and Arban, led by a commander of 10. 10 Arbans formed 100, commanded by a centurion. 10 hundreds made up 1,000, a Mingan, commanded by a Chiliarch. and 10,000s constituted a tumen, the largest military unit, managed by a particularly trusted and experienced general, a tumenbashi. This strict and crystal-clear structure ensured not only impeccable discipline, but also incredibly high mobility and manageability of the troops. Every warrior knew their exact place and tasks, and commanders had clear instructions, and were accountable to superior officers. This structure allowed Genghis Khan to effectively command a vast army that could act quickly and precisely even in the most complex and extreme conditions. Genghis Khan paid particular attention to the personal qualities of his commanders. He selected officers not by their lineage but purely by their abilities and merits. Thanks to this, his army included truly talented generals such as Subutai, Jeeb, and Mughali. They came from diverse social strata and tribes, but all were united by absolute loyalty to the Khan and immense military talent. The Mongol state was governed not only by force of arms, but also by a clear system of civil administration. Genghis Khan appointed trusted individuals, responsible for tax collection, army supply organization, and communication among the empire's regions. Throughout the empire, a sophisticated network of couriers operated, the famous Yam postal service, which allowed for swift delivery of orders and messages over vast distances. Postal stations were located a day's journey apart, enabling couriers to continuously switch horses and travel at incredible speeds. Despite all its harshness and strictness, Genghis Khan's rule was characterized by particular fairness towards common people. Even though punishments for crimes were extremely severe, the common people highly valued the Yasa for its clarity and uniformity for all. Whether you were a common warrior or a great general, the rules were uniform and immutable. In Genghis Khan's state, people could expect their rights to be protected as long as they remained loyal to the laws and the Khan. Thus, the internal structure of the state became one of the key factors in the Mongols' success. Clear organization, strict laws, and impeccable discipline allowed Genghis Khan to create a state capable not only of holding vast territories under control, but also of successfully and rapidly conquering new lands. Now, understanding how Genghis Khan's state and army were organized, I can more clearly see why the Mongols were able to create the greatest continental empire in world history. With this foundation, we will smoothly transition to the next part of our saga, the great Mongolian conquest that forever altered the face and destinies of a vast portion of Eurasia. Chapter 5. The First Strike, the conquest of the Jin Empire. Once the unified Mongolian state was established and firmly consolidated internally, Genghis Khan set his ambitious sights far beyond the native Mongolian steppes. His first major target was the rich and powerful Jin Empire, which controlled vast territories in northern modern-day China. This state, founded by the Jurchens, a warrior people, had existed for about 100 years, and possessed a formidable army, powerful fortresses, and a developed system of governance. However, despite its outward strength, the Jin Empire was experiencing a severe internal crisis. Its ruling elite was weakened by constant internecine conflicts, palace intrigues, and pervasive corruption among officials. This created ideal conditions for a Mongolian invasion. Genghis Khan fully understood the situation, closely monitored events, and awaited the most opportune moment to deliver his crushing blow. In 1211, the Mongolian army, numbering around 100,000 warriors, crossed the Jin borders, beginning its historic, relentless offensive. The first major confrontation took place at the Yihuling Pass, a strategically important location. The Chinese forces significantly outnumbered the Mongols, and their generals anticipated a quick and easy victory. However, Genghis Khan had meticulously prepared for the battle and employed his famous feigned retreat tactic. The Mongols deliberately retreated, luring the Jin forces into a deadly trap, after which they attacked from three sides, encircling and utterly crushing the enemy. This victory marked a crucial psychological turning point. Chinese generals and troops realized for the first time just how dangerous their adversaries were. Following this resounding success, the Mongolian army began its rapid advance through northern China, capturing cities and fortresses one after another. The primary reason for the Mongols' successes was their incredible mobility. The Mongolian army could undertake lightning-fast marches over vast distances, easily bypassing strong fortifications and attacking weakly defended locations. Furthermore, Genghis Khan paid particular attention to reconnaissance. His couriers and scouts meticulously surveyed enemy territory in advance, supplying the army with precise information about its weak points. One significant problem the Mongols faced during their initial campaigns was their lack of experience in taking fortified cities. However, Genghis Khan quickly found a solution to this problem. By capturing numerous Chinese artisans and engineers, the Mongols managed to adopt from them the art of siege warfare. They swiftly learned to use battering rams, siege towers, and catapults, thanks to which even the most powerful fortresses began to fall one after another. A key event in the first phase of the Jin Empire's conquest was the capture of its capital, the city of Jiangdu, known today as Beijing. The Mongols besieged this vast city in 1214. The siege was incredibly harsh and brutal. It lasted several months and was accompanied by agonizing hunger and disease among the city's defenders and inhabitants. Eventually, in the spring of 1215, the exhausted and desperate inhabitants of Jiangdu agreed to open the gates, trusting the Mongols' promises to spare their lives. However, after the capitulation, Genghis Khan, demonstrating his ruthlessness, decided to punish the city for its prolonged resistance. The walls were destroyed, a significant portion of the city was thoroughly plundered, and many inhabitants were either killed or taken captive. This demonstrative brutality had a powerful psychological effect, compelling other cities in northern China to capitulate much faster and without active resistance. However, it is important to emphasize that the fall of Jiangdu in 1215 did not signify the definitive end of the Jin Empire. The remaining court and army retreated south, relocating the capital to Kaifeng, where the Jurchens continued to offer fierce resistance. The war continued for nearly 2 more decades after the capture of Beijing. It was only in 1234, after Genghis Khan's death, that his successors were able to finally conquer the Jin Empire, fully subjugating its territories to Mongol rule. The reasons for the Mongolian army's success in these campaigns were crystal clear and evident. The Mongols surpassed their adversaries in mobility and speed of movement, possessed unrivaled discipline, and had the strictest military organization. Their commanders expertly utilized intelligence data, rapidly made strategic decisions, and masterfully employed psychological warfare against the enemy. Many Chinese cities and regions surrendered practically without a fight, unwilling to share the fate of the devastated Jiangdu. Mongolian forces also effectively utilized captured resources and technologies, swiftly learning new skills and tactical approaches. It was precisely this that enabled such rapid and successful advancement deep into northern China. Thus, Genghis Khan's first eastern conquests not only demonstrated the might of the Mongolian army to the world, but also instilled confidence in the empire that it was capable of subjugating even the most developed and powerful civilizations. The conquest of northern China became the foundation for subsequent campaigns that forever altered the map of Eurasia and ushered in an entirely new era of world history. Chapter 6. The Khan's Vengeance. The fall of the Khwarazmian Empire. After successfully seizing a significant portion of northern China and consolidating power in East Asia, Genghis Khan turned his discerning gaze westward. His next target became the rich, prosperous lands of Central Asia, where the powerful state, the Khwarazmian Empire, was located. In the early 13th century, Khwarazm-Shah Muhammad ruled over a vast territory encompassing modern-day Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Iran, and parts of Afghanistan and Kazakhstan. This empire was renowned for its high culture, wealthy cities such as Samarkand, Bukhara, and Urgench, and served as a crucial hub for world trade at that time. Initially, Genghis Khan did not plan a direct war with Khwarezm. His initial intention was to establish diplomatic and trade relations with this rich and developed country, as the Mongols fully understood the importance of commerce and cultural exchange. In 1218, Genghis Khan dispatched a massive caravan laden with gifts and valuable goods to the city of Otrar, accompanied by envoys offering the Khwarezm-Shah peaceful trade. However, the Khwarezmian governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, suspecting the Mongolian merchants of espionage, made a tragic, fatal error. He brutally plundered the caravan, executed the Mongolian merchants, and grossly insulted the envoys. Genghis Khan was profoundly insulted and enraged by this act, perceiving the attack on his envoys as a personal, unforgivable affront. Khwarazmshah Muhammad, instead of punishing his governor and attempting to reconcile with the Mongols, further exacerbated the situation by executing the remaining Mongolian diplomats. Now, war was inevitable. In response, Genghis Khan meticulously planned a large-scale and ruthless campaign, which became one of the most devastating conquests in world history. In 1219, the Mongolian army, numbering around 200,000 warriors, invaded Khwarazmian lands, rapidly advancing through the steppes and deserts of Central Asia. The Mongols attacked simultaneously from several directions, sowing chaos and genuine terror among the Khwarazmshah's inhabitants and troops, who simply couldn't react adequately to the lightning-fast assaults. The Mongols' first major target was the very city that had provoked the war, Otrar. The siege of the city lasted nearly 5 months. Ultimately, Otrar fell after fierce resistance, and its governor, Inalchuk, was captured and executed by the Mongols in the cruelest manner. Molten silver was poured down his throat, a symbolic punishment for his unthinkable greed and perfidy. The Mongols then pressed onward to Khwarezm's largest cultural and trade centers, Bukhara and Samarkand. In 1220, the Mongolian army approached the walls of Bukhara. The city was quickly encircled and, despite strong walls and desperate defense, soon surrendered. The Mongols stormed into the city, and although Genghis Khan initially spared the inhabitants, ordering artisans, scholars, and clergy to be kept alive, the city itself was mercilessly plundered, many homes burned, and a significant portion of the population taken captive. Next to fall was Samarkand, one of the most beautiful and wealthiest cities of that era, renowned for its outstanding scholars and skilled artisans. The city's siege also did not last long. Despite strong defenses, the Mongols utilized sophisticated siege engines, with which they breached the walls and stormed inside. The capture of Samarkand was accompanied by immense destruction and countless casualties. Most of the city was ravaged and destroyed, its population partly slaughtered and partly led into captivity. However, the most dramatic moment of the war was the fate of Khwarezm's capital, the city of Urgench. The Mongols approached it in 1221. Urgench was Khwarezm's largest and most fortified city, and its siege lasted several months, accompanied by the fiercest fighting for every street and every tower. When the city fell, losses were immense on both sides, and the Mongols subjected it to complete destruction and fire. The demise of Urgench became a terrible symbol of the Khwarazmian Empire's utter collapse. Khwarazmshah Muhammad, having suffered a crushing defeat, fled west and soon died of illness in exile. Having lost the power, prestige, and empire he once so proudly commanded, the consequences of the Mongol invasion of Central Asia proved truly catastrophic. Many major cities in the region were virtually destroyed or heavily devastated, and the population decreased severalfold. The great culture and prosperity of these lands were abruptly interrupted, and recovery would take many decades. The Mongols also purposefully relocated artisans, craftsmen, scholars, and other talented individuals to their empire, facilitating the transfer of cultural and scientific achievements to other regions. However, there were also long-term consequences that proved significant for all of world history. Central Asia was incorporated into the vast Mongol Empire, and the Great Silk Road fell entirely under Mongol control. This created conditions for unimpeded cultural and commercial exchange between East and West, which profoundly influenced the development of all of Eurasia. Chapter 7. The Battle of Khalkha, Europe aflame after the successful subjugation of Central Asia and the complete defeat of the Khwarazmian Empire. Mongol forces continued their westward advance, deeper into territories yet unexplored by them. Their attention was now fixed on the vast expanses of Eastern Europe and the extensive Pontic steppe, inhabited by numerous peoples and tribes who were as yet unaware of the formidable invincible force approaching their borders. Genghis Khan himself did not personally participate in the European campaigns, but he entrusted command to two of his most outstanding generals, Jib and Subutai. These commanders possessed immense experience and had repeatedly proven their mastery in the most complex military expeditions. Their army consisted of tens of thousands of Mongol warriors, distinguished by their unrivaled mobility, supreme discipline, and an astonishing ability to cover vast distances in a short time. By the early 1220s, the Mongols were rapidly advancing through the Caucasus, defeating the Alans and Cumans, and drawing ever closer to the borders of the Rus principalities. Soon rumors of brutal and mysterious conquerors began to reach the Rus lands. However, the local princes poorly grasped the true threat, perceiving the Mongols as mere nomadic people and failing to foresee the might and tactical prowess they would soon face. In the spring of 1223, the Cuman Khan Khotian, gripped by panic, appealed to the Rus princes for help, warning them of a new, extremely dangerous enemy. The Rus princes, confidently deciding to aid the Cumans, hoped to swiftly and decisively deal with the threat. A large united army was assembled, including forces from Prince Mstislav Romanovich of Kiev, Prince Mstislav Mstislavich of Halych, as well as warriors from Chernihiv, Smolensk, and other principalities. After Gayak, power passed to the descendants of Genghis Khan's youngest son, Tului. His son Manki became the Great Khan, and after him, another son of Tului, the famous Kublai Khan. It was under Kublai that the empire reached its peak of cultural and economic prosperity, but simultaneously, the irreversible process of its disintegration began. Parallel to the rule of these great Khans, the separate territories allocated to Genghis Khan's sons gradually began to transform into independent states, khanates. Thus Hochi's lands transformed into the Golden Horde, covering vast territories from Siberia to the Black Sea and from the Urals to Eastern Europe. The Chagatai Khanate occupied the central part of Central Asia, where it survived for a long time, preserving the unique cultural traditions of the Mongols. Hulagu's Khanate, another descendant of Tului, covered the territories of modern Iran and Iraq, forming the basis of the Ilkhanate state, which became an important center of Persian culture. These Khanates increasingly distanced themselves from central authority, gradually becoming independent states with their own interests, armies, and cultures. By the end of the 14th century, the unified Mongol Empire practically ceased to exist as a cohesive state, fragmenting into several large khanates, each of which continued its unique independent path. Thus, the division of lands among Genghis Khan's sons, despite his foresight and prudence, led to the gradual fragmentation of the once unified and powerful empire. The struggle for power among heirs and their descendants gradually eroded the unity laid down by the Great Khan. However, it was this fragmentation that created conditions for the unique cultural flourishing of individual parts of the former empire, each of which preserved and developed the legacy of the great conqueror in its own way. Chapter 11. The Golden Horde. Pages of Eastern European history after the death of Genghis Khan and the subsequent division of the vast Mongol Empire, one of the most significant states of the Middle Ages emerged. The Golden Horde. As I have already mentioned, this powerful Khanate was founded by Genghis Khan's grandson, Hochi's son, Batu, a man whose activities had a decisive, indelible impact on the history of Eastern Europe. Batu was an experienced military commander and a talented political leader who managed not only to preserve but also significantly expand the territories he received from his father. In 1236 to 1241, under his command, Mongol forces undertook the famous Western campaign, defeating the Rus principalities, Poland, Hungary, and approaching the very heart of Europe. However, in 1241, after the death of the great Khan Ogedei, Batu decided to halt his westward advance and return to participate in matters of power succession within the Mongol Empire. Upon returning from the campaign, Batu established a strong and centralized state in the conquered territories. He built the city of Sarai Batu on the lower Volga, making it his capital. Later, after Batu's death, the capital was moved to a new, more magnificent city, Sarai Berk, by his brother and successor, Khan Berk. Sarai Berk became the most important center of trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange between East and West. This city remained the heart of the Golden Horde for many years, symbolizing its might and prosperity. The Golden Horde soon transformed into a powerful state, stretching from Siberia and the Urals in the east to the Danube in the west. After the destruction of Kiev in 1240, the Rus lands definitively fell under the rule of the Mongol Khans. The period of their dominion went down in history as the Mongol yoke, becoming a serious, heavy trial for Rus. The Rus principalities were obliged to regularly pay a significant tribute to the Horde Khans, which was called Vaikod, Mongol tribute. Tax collection was carried out by Mongol officials, Baskaks, who strictly monitored compliance with obligations. Non-fulfillment or delay of payments immediately entailed severe punishments. Such conditions long-term weakened the economy of the Rus lands and significantly restricted their independent development. However, the Horde's influence was not solely destructive. Thanks to the establishment of Mongol dominion, the Great Silk Road was restored and stabilized, connecting Europe with the East. Trade revived, and the Rus principalities gained access to new technologies, goods, and cultural achievements from China, Persia, and India. Goods previously unknown in Europe began to appear in Rus cities, which contributed to cultural exchange and development. Mongol rule also indirectly contributed to the rise of Moscow. The Muscovite princes managed to establish good relations with the Horde Khans and received from them the right to independently collect tribute from the Rus lands. Thanks to this, the Muscovite principality strengthened its influence, later becoming the center for the unification of Rus territories. The Mongol administrative system, based on strict centralization and rigid hierarchy, significantly influenced the political culture of Rus. Many elements of Mongol administration, such as the tax system, military organization, and territorial governance, were partially adopted by the Rus principalities, laying the foundations for a future centralized state. The Golden Horde was not just another conqueror. It became a key element that determined the subsequent development of Eastern Europe. For several centuries, the Horde served as a buffer between Europe and Asia, influencing cultural and political processes throughout the region. The peoples under its rule adopted certain elements of Mongol culture, which left an imprint on their subsequent history and mentality. However, over time, the Golden Horde began to gradually weaken. By the end of the 14th century, the state started to suffer from internal conflicts and power struggles, leading to its gradual disintegration. In place of the unified Horde, separate independent khanates emerged. Kazan, Astrakhan, Crimean, and Siberian, each of which retained part of the legacy of Mongol rule but never regained its former might. Thus, the Golden Horde, founded by Batu, became a most important part of Eastern European history. Mongol dominion influenced the economy, culture, political system, and even the destinies of peoples who endured this challenging historical trial. And although the state itself disappeared, its influence continued to define the region's development for many centuries. Now, having explored the history of the Golden Horde and its significance for Eastern Europe, I am ready to move on to the final part of our lecture, to discuss the legacy of Genghis Khan and how it influenced the development of world history. Chapter 12. China under the Horde and the Mongol Peace. After I examined the history of the Golden Horde and its influence on the destinies of Eastern Europe, let us now turn to another part of the once unified Mongol Empire, where Genghis Khan's legacy also played a crucial role. This concerns distant China, where the grandson of the great conqueror, the famous Kublai Khan, founded a new imperial dynasty, the Yuan, opening a completely new, unique page in Chinese history. Kublai was Genghis Khan's grandson, the son of Tolui, the youngest son of the great Khan. Even in his youth he proved himself a talented statesman and an outstanding military commander, who managed to unite a significant part of his grandfather's legacy under his rule. In 1271, Kublai officially proclaimed himself Chinese emperor, establishing the new Mongol Yuan dynasty, which translates to original or foundational. This event was momentous. For the first time in Chinese history, a dynasty founded by people not of ethnic Chinese origin came to power. Under Kublai Khan, the territory of the Chinese state significantly expanded. In 1279, he succeeded in finally conquering the southern Song dynasty, uniting almost all of China under his rule. The new imperial capital was built in Beijing, then known as Khanbalik or Dadu. This city was built according to a strict plan, becoming one of the greatest capitals of the medieval world with wide streets, magnificent palaces, gardens, and temples, emphasizing the grandeur of the new empire. Kublai pursued a policy aimed at reconciling Mongol and Chinese cultures. He strove to preserve and respect Chinese traditions, while simultaneously introducing Mongol customs. The Yuan Empire became a unique historical phenomenon, combining the best achievements of Mongol and Chinese civilizations. State administration was structured according to the Chinese model, with a powerful bureaucracy, civil service examinations for officials, and a developed taxation system. At the same time, the Mongol nobility held the highest state and military positions, ensuring their dominant position in the country. Kublai Khan gained renown not only for his military and political successes, but also for outstanding cultural achievements. He was a patron of science, art, and literature. The best minds of his time gathered at his court. It was under his rule that China experienced a true flourishing of culture, science, and technology. Observatories, libraries, and academies were established where scholars and thinkers from different countries worked. Printing, gunpowder, porcelain, cartography, and medicine received a strong impetus for development thanks to active state support. Kublai paid special attention to the development of trade and international relations. Under him, the Great Silk Road was significantly strengthened, becoming not only a trade route but also a vital artery of cultural exchange between East and West. China of that time was open to foreigners, and merchants from all over the world could freely come to the Yuan Empire, trade, live, and work within it. One of the most famous guests of Kublai Khan was a young Italian named Marco Polo. In the late 13th century, he arrived in China with his father and uncle, having traveled a long and dangerous path along the Silk Road. Kublai warmly welcomed the travelers, bringing Marco Polo close to his court. Marco spent more than 17 years in China, carrying out the Khan's assignments, visiting the most remote corners of the country, and thoroughly studying its life and culture. Upon returning to Europe, Marco Polo wrote the famous book Description of the World, better known as The Travels of Marco Polo. This book became the first detailed and vivid chronicle of mysterious and distant China available to European readers. It was full of vivid descriptions of the wealth and splendor of Chinese civilization, amazing inventions, and the way of life of its people. The travels of Marco Polo sparked immense interest in the East among Europeans and inspired many subsequent generations of travelers and explorers, including Christopher Columbus, who later embarked on his famous journey, attempting to find a shorter route to the legendary eastern lands. However, despite all its achievements, the Yuan Empire gradually declined after the death of Kublai Khan in 1294. His successors no longer possessed his wisdom and political talent. The Mongol nobility became increasingly alienated from the Chinese population, intensifying internal contradictions. Taxes became increasingly burdensome, and peasant uprisings and discontent among the Chinese elite increasingly led to internal conflicts. In 1368, the Chinese Ming dynasty overthrew the rule of the Mongol rulers and ended the Yuan dynasty. Chapter 13, Pax Mongolica, an era of peace and exchange after the Mongols managed to unite vast territories of Eurasia into a single empire. A unique period ensued in history, which historians call Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace. This term highlights an exceptional era of stability, order, and active interaction between peoples who previously existed in isolation from each other. The Mongol peace lasted approximately from the mid-13th to the mid-14th century and had a profound, irreversible impact on all of Eurasia. One of the main achievements of the Pax Mongolica period was the creation of a secure and stable trade system. Previously, trade routes, particularly the Great Silk Road, were often subjected to attacks by bandits and were full of dangers. But the Mongols, by establishing unified rule over a vast territory, were able to provide reliable protection and support for caravans traveling between China, Persia, Central Asia, Rus, and Europe. For the first time in centuries, merchants could safely traverse enormous distances, transporting precious goods, Chinese silk, Indian spices, Persian fabrics, precious stones, medicines, and books. As a result, international trade flourished, connecting previously distant regions of the world. Travel became more frequent and accessible. Merchants and diplomats moved freely throughout the empire. During this period, numerous inns and postal stations, known as yam, emerged, where travelers could rest, change horses, and obtain information about the condition of routes. Thus, Mongol rule contributed to the formation of the first historical system of international infrastructure and logistics, a prototype of modern trade routes and communications. An equally important outcome of Pax Mongolica was the active cultural and technological exchange between East and West. The Mongols encouraged contacts among scholars, artisans, and representatives of different religions. Chinese inventions, such as gunpowder, paper, printing, and the compass, first spread widely across Eurasia, reaching Central Asia and Europe. Europeans adopted many technologies and knowledge from the East, which later played a decisive role in the Renaissance. In turn, Western masters and scholars came to Asia, bringing their knowledge and crafts, thereby enriching local cultures. One of the brightest examples of this cultural exchange was the activity of Marco Polo, who lived for many years at the court of Kublai Khan. His descriptions of China and Asian peoples inspired many Europeans to undertake new travels and explorations. But Marco Polo was just one of many such travelers. Diplomats, missionaries, merchants, artisans, and adventurers constantly moved along the Eurasian routes, exchanging not only goods but also ideas, philosophy, and knowledge. However, despite all its achievements, the Pax Mongolica period proved to be relatively short-lived. By the mid-14th century, the Mongol Empire began to disintegrate. The reasons for this were diverse and interconnected. Firstly, the vast territory itself proved too complex for unified central governance. Regional rulers and khanates gradually became increasingly independent. Internal conflicts, discord, and power struggles began. This significantly weakened the empire's stability and security. Secondly, the Mongol nobility gradually became alienated from the local population, especially in China, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe. Harsh tax policies, increased corruption among Mongol officials, and constant abuses of power caused widespread discontent and led to numerous uprisings and rebellions. China, for example, was swept by a wave of peasant uprisings, which ultimately led to the overthrow of the Mongol Yuan dynasty and the rise to power of the Chinese Ming dynasty in 1368. A third reason for the collapse of Pax Mongolica was epidemics and natural disasters, which severely undermined the economic and demographic stability of the empire. The most devastating of such epidemics was the famous Black Death, the bubonic plague, which spread along trade routes from Asia to Europe. It was precisely the Mongol trade routes and the high mobility of the population that contributed to the rapid spread of the disease, which engulfed all of Eurasia. This led to the death of millions of people and caused a profound crisis in all affected regions. Finally, the fourth reason was the gradual weakening of the Mongol army itself, which could not endlessly maintain discipline and a high level of military training. Military campaigns became increasingly less successful. Internal conflicts among military commanders intensified, which also contributed to the gradual weakening and disintegration of the unified Mongol state. Chapter 14. The legacy of Genghis Khan, the echo of a great empire, after the unified Mongol Empire disintegrated, and the era of Pax Mongolica concluded, the fates of numerous Mongol states diverged. A completely new historical period began. Mongol khanates became independent and gradually started to integrate into local cultures and societies, changing their identity, but leaving behind a profound, indelible mark. However, by the end of the 14th century, Mongol conquest traditions unexpectedly, like a phoenix from ashes, revived in the person of the famous military commander and conqueror Timur, known in Europe as Tamerlane. Although Timur himself was not a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, he positioned himself as his spiritual heir, aiming to restore the grandeur of Mongol conquests. Timur originated from the Turkic-Mongol milieu of Central Asia, and his political and military culture was closely linked to the Mongol heritage. Timur began a series of large-scale conquests, encompassing vast territories from Central Asia to Persia, the Caucasus, and even the borders of Eastern Europe and India. He united the fragmented states of Central Asia under his rule, creating a new powerful empire with its capital in Samarkand. Under Timur, the city of Samarkand became the most important cultural and political center of Eurasia. Flourishing and known for its magnificent architectural structures, scholars, artists, and poets. However, Timur's empire, despite its conquest successes and cultural prosperity, lasted relatively short. Soon after Timur's death in 1405, his state began to fragment due to internal conflicts among his heirs. Thus gradually concluded the last major attempt to revive Mongol conquest traditions, and the peoples of Central Asia began to return to their former diversity of independent states and khanates. Meanwhile, in the territories of former Mongol possessions in Eastern Europe, especially in the Rus lands, significant changes also occurred. The Golden Horde fragmented into several independent states: the Kazan, Astrakhan, Crimean, and Siberian khanates. These khanates gradually integrated into the cultural environment of neighboring peoples and progressively lost their purely Mongol identity, acquiring characteristics of Turkic and Muslim cultures. In the 16th century, many of these khanates were conquered by the Russian Tsardom, and their territories became part of the Russian state. The Mongol legacy, nonetheless, persisted in the language, culture, customs, and even the political organization of the peoples inhabiting these lands. In China, after the overthrow of the Yuan dynasty in 1368 and the rise to power of the Chinese Ming dynasty, Mongol influence gradually diminished. The Mongol rulers were driven back to the steppes, where they continued to exist as separate tribes and small states, but they never managed to restore their former unity and might. Nevertheless, the Mongol legacy had a lasting impact on Chinese culture and state structure, leaving its mark on the tax system, military organization, and even certain elements of daily life and culture. In Mongolia itself, after the disintegration of the empire, a period of fragmentation and internecine strife began. Mongolia became an arena of constant clashes between various nomadic tribes who fought for pastures and power. This fragmentation continued until the 17th century, when Mongol lands were subordinated to the Manchu Qing dynasty, definitively ending the era of an independent Mongol state. Despite the loss of political influence, the Mongol legacy in Eurasia proved to be incredibly profound and long-lasting. In Central Asia, the Mongol conquest and Timur's rule left a rich architectural and cultural heritage, evident in the magnificent structures of Samarkand and Bukhara. In the Rus lands, the Mongol yoke seriously influenced the formation of a centralized state, administrative system, and culture. Even in China, where the memory of the Yuan dynasty persisted as a complex and ambiguous period, the Mongol period's influence remained in the development of infrastructure, trade routes, and cultural exchange with the West. Thus, the subsequent fate of the Mongol states after the disintegration of Genghis Khan's empire was diverse and challenging. Mongol influence gradually integrated into other cultures and traditions, leaving a significant mark on the history of many peoples. And although the political unity created by Genghis Khan never recurred, his legacy proved to be long-lasting, vibrant, and palpable for many centuries, continuing to remind the world of the great era of Mongol conquests.